Shabbat Shalom. It's good to have everybody here. How are they, Pop? Good?
No, he said they need a little bit, little less cooking, more sitting out, so they're gooier and crispier on the outside if I leave them in the pan. Does it matter if I do the glass pan or the silver pan? Okay.
But you don't use glass pans. Somebody from the sisterhood once asked my dad for his challah recipe, and he said, "Listen, I bake commercially. It wouldn't be the same." He said, "No, we want to know how you make those wonderful challahs." He said, "No, really, it's a different kind of baking." She said, "No, give us the recipe." He said, "Okay, you got a pencil? Good. Start with 500 pounds high gluten flour, right? 18 quarts of eggs, That's how you make challah in a bakery. I mean, it's a different world. You're talking a different world. Good morning. It's good to have you here. Shabbat Shalom. All right, a couple of very brief announcements. This, of course, is going to be our last session for the season. Okay, from here till the end of August, we're going to be on hiatus, on vacation. You're welcome every Saturday morning to get up early. You can either sit in your kitchen with a chumash and read through the Parsha of the week. I thoroughly suggest it. It's Deuteronomy. It's a very accessible Torah, and there's some wonderful commentaries out there that are just beautiful. You're going to have Torah Parsha group? Right, if you want to come and listen to and join Judy's Parsha group after shul, you can do that. I understand there's now an archive on the VBS website. You click a button to get the recordings of these sessions, and if you want to go back and watch reruns, the Torah hasn't changed that much in a year or two, so you can go back and watch last year's at the year. Oh, I was there. I fell asleep for that one. So please, good morning. So,
what time does Yossi start?
What time does Yossi starts the service at about 9:30. Okay, unless he's feeling enthusiastic, in which it's 9:20, but 9:30, and we'll have services all summer. But I'm going to be away. Okay, we will commence the first week in September. So that's Labor Day weekend. It's also Slichas that night. So the first weekend in September, we'll all be together. Okay? Is that good? So because this is the last one of the season, so a very special thank you. First of all, to everybody for coming and making Shabbos exciting. It's really nice to be able to have a group of friends to study with in the morning. Good to have my pop back in shul, right? It's been a hell of a year. It's been a hell of a year. So it's from where we started to now. Whew. So thanks. I'm glad you're here. Thank God you're here. I want to thank the Barnhart family for making the live stream possible. So all of our friends, all of our friends at Fountain View and all over the world that are watching this. And, I know we get 600 or 700 hits every week. So I know. So we're trying to figure out, there's a thing called an ambient mic that they'll put in the ceiling, and then that'll pick up questions and other things, or we'll have a pass-around mic. We're trying to solve that problem. The other problem I discovered, which I forgot, is that we forgot to put the handouts on the website, so we'll do that next year too. I apologize for that. Yeah, these guys have them. So
don't have air conditioning problems online.
Yeah, well, the air conditioning's nice today. Good. All right, a couple of other quick announcements. So following our learning today, there's a service in the Sher Lapati Chapel. It's Sheila Paley, our dear friend, is having her 83rd birthday, sort of a second bar mitzvah, so we like to celebrate with her. Otherwise, it's a lovely davening, otherwise straight through without interruptions and things, so we'll end a little early today. Tonight is the Jewish day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. It begins at sunset tonight. Here at VBS, we're celebrating or commemorating Tisha B'Av with our friends from Adat Ariel and Stephen S. Weiss. We're going to begin at 7:30 with learning together, and then we'll commence with the reading of the traditional book of Echa at 8:30, and everyone is invited. I'll explain the fasting in just a second. You're all invited, so please come. Come comfortable. It's going to be a very warm day. We're going through another one of these heat events. Apparently not as bad as the last one, but bad. As I said, it's only going to be 107 in Woodland Hills, so, compared to the 121, so I guess that's balmy. But please make sure that you and your relatives and friends either are in a place where there's air conditioning. If you know of somebody, we're particularly worried about elderly people living alone. who might forget to switch on the air conditioning, or their air conditioning isn't functioning. So if you have friends who are living alone and are not able to adjust it, please check with them. We had a call around last time to make sure that everyone in the synagogue who we knew about that was living alone. So please check with them. The synagogue is open because we have minyan here in the evening. So if anybody needs a place to retreat to and just sit in air conditioning, it'll be here. And you're welcome to come here. If you know of somebody who's in trouble, please call me right away. Call me on my cell at home. Don't worry about Shabbos. We need to rescue people. If anything over 100 degrees, if you're inside and you're not getting air, is dangerous. And I worry about this a lot because 100 degrees is very hot. 97 is hot. 107 is a different world. So please, please, please make sure that friends, family, acquaintances, be a little pushy. Just pick up the phone and call them and say, are you okay? Is your air conditioning on? Right? It's really very important. Otherwise, I don't want to lose anybody to this. So please be very, very careful. Okay? So far, so good? So the ninth day of Av, which begins tonight, the ninth day of Av, is the day on which the Jewish tradition has sort of lumped all of the great catastrophes that befell the Jewish people from the Bible times up till the modernity. The Holocaust was not included, and I'll tell you why in a second. So the tradition is, and it's mythical, but it makes the point, is that the first temple in 586 was destroyed by the Babylonians on Tisha B'Av, on the ninth day of Av. And the second temple in 70 was destroyed by the Romans on the ninth day of Av. And the various kinds of catastrophes and expulsions, the expulsion from Spain, the massacre at York, the various expulsions and catastrophes that have marked and marred Jewish history all took place on this day, and they're all commemorated on this day. The strategy here is that if you were to put them on different days through the year, then the Jewish year would be marked, would be pocked with all of these catastrophic days. And if the Jewish year was completely the story of catastrophe, that would become the story of Jewish life. And the rabbis didn't want this to become the story of Jewish life. They wanted the story of Jewish life to be the joy of pursuing a life of mitzvah, the joy of pursuing a life of Torah. So they took all the catastrophes, bunched them into one box, and stuck them on one day. That's psychologically, social psychologically, that makes a certain amount of sense. It creates a certain atmosphere. So this one day, now, what they did with this one day reflects their theology, the classical rabbinic theology, which is that God is the actor in history, God is the determinant of our history. Therefore, if catastrophes befall us, it's because we have deserved them. Catastrophe is punishment. Catastrophe is refinement for our sins. Catastrophe is recompense for our sins. If we close that door, we'll keep the air quiet. Is that okay? It'll keep it a little cooler in here. So because of that, you associate sin and transgression and wrongdoing with the suffering we're having, and therefore the mode is we need to repent for those sins. God will forgive us and bring us closer again, and the catastrophes will be undone. If you read the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentation, which is the classic book of the Bible, it's a very short book at the end of the Hebrew Bible that's going to be read tonight as part of the service. The famous line in the 5th chapter is Chashivenu Adonai v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. Bring us closer. Hashivenu is the verb form of tshuva. Let us do tshuva. Bring us closer. Let us return. Allow us to return to you, God, and forgive us and bring us home and renew our days as of old. So the fasting is part of a repentance mode. I'm repenting the sins so that I undo the catastrophe. Does that make sense? Now, the problem was that when they sat down to decide how do we remember Holocaust, do you want to make that statement about Holocaust? And the Jewish community of modernity felt it's too hard. It's too hard to imagine. I mean, if it were hard last week we saw this in Jeremiah, if it was hard for the community of the time to accept Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, as a tool of God's wrath against the sinful Israel, how much harder is it to imagine Hitler as a tool of God's wrath against the sinful Israel? So to apply that idea of sin, catastrophe, repentance, and return to the Holocaust was too bitter, just too bitter. So the Holocaust was not included in this holiday. It was given a separate day. Maybe one day it will be put into this holiday. We'll have to see. Now, there are two major objections to this. So one objection to this, of course, is that I reject, having experienced the Holocaust in our time, I reject the whole theology. This idea that God is the only actor in history and we're deserving of our exile and our pain and our persecution is neurotic. I mean, it's first of all, it's strange, and and second of all, it's simply neurotic. It's the abused child begging the abusive parent to please let me come home and live and it's my fault that you had to beat me. I mean, there's something simply perverse about this theology. That is the modern rejection of that whole theology. So that's some people's problem with this holiday. The other problem with this holiday is that it doesn't recognize that if you want to take the holiday at its face value and say our catastrophes are our fault, then the fact that the state of Israel exists and the city of Jerusalem is a Jewish city seems to mean that we've finished with that period of our history. So, it's a sort of anti-Zionist move to say I'm going to sit on the floor and grieve for a broken Jerusalem when a real Jerusalem exists and it's Jewish. You see? There's a David Hartman's famous story that in 1970 he came to visit Israel. And he was so taken. It was a religious experience in the country. And he comes back to his congregation in Montreal. And there they are sitting on the floor of the synagogue singing these sad dirges, these sad songs about our exile. And he goes, guys, we got it back. It's real. Come, let's go. And they wouldn't get up. And he realized that there was a great break in Jewish history. So there's a question about whether or not you continue to even celebrate this holiday, and there's a big debate among Jewish scholars and thinkers. There's some who say fast a half a day. At the Mincha service, things change. It's a different haftorah. You move from the destruction and repentance to something more forward-looking. So maybe you stop fasting at Mincha, and that's been a custom as well. These are the various different answers to this. Does that make some sense? So it's an interesting holiday. It's an interesting holiday to think about. Tonight what we're going to do is that, and you're all going to yell at me because it's political, but tonight what we're going to do is look at, there's a very long section in the Talmud that discusses how we lost Jerusalem. Now it's a rabbinic, you'll see what the rabbis do with this. The rabbis have a really interesting way of reading this. They read it as a set of lessons on the failure of leadership. How did the leadership of the community fail again and again and again that led to this catastrophe? They drew lessons for their own leadership of the community. And that's a very, very interesting set of midrashim, set of stories, of tales of the destruction. And we'll do that tonight. We'll learn those texts tonight as part of our study. Yes, please. Says hi, Joe.
Sorry, I have a question.
Don't be sorry.
To interrupt you.
Yeah.
But as a 21st century rabbi,
Yeah.
how do you grapple
Yeah.
with the changing times, and we're supposed to live in the world of a Torah time, living and changing Torah?
Yeah.
To those who say we have no connection to this fast day,
Yeah.
or even to Yom Kippur as a fast day, we want to be here, we want to be godly.
Hi, come in.
We just don't think that fasting is the way to go.
How do I? Well, fasting as a religious gesture is an ancient religious gesture. It's almost universal. I think every culture has some kind of reflection of this. It's a question of self-denial, a question of denying myself nutrition, and nutrition is life, right? So I'm sort of cutting myself off from the sources of life and dealing with the discomfort of fasting, right? So the question is, does it attach itself to the themes and to the meaning of the holiday? That's an interesting question, right? And it's an arbitrary kind of thing. I mean, we could have made Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av different. We could have said, walk only on your right foot. For the whole day, walk on your right foot, and that'll show God that you choose a physical gesture. But all cultures choose physical gestures in order to express certain deep values and movements of the heart. You're expressing a movement of the heart, a movement of the mind, with a movement of the body. Right? I don't know how many of you are into sports, but this week, the NFL, the National Football League, no religious organization, is debating is debating whether or not players need to stand during the national anthem. Now, what difference does it make if you stand or sit? Again, physical gestures represent an internal gesture. And a physical gesture of standing and putting your hand over your heart during a patriotic song says something, and kneeling down on one foot, on one knee, says something very different, you see? And so we've decided, I mean, and it's arbitrary, it could be the other way around, but this is what, in certain places, kneeling down is a symbol of reverence, not standing up. You know what I'm talking about? So this is a gesture that we've chosen as a symbol. Okay, the gesture itself is, we've just chosen this. That's not the interesting part. The interesting question is, do I share the sentiments? Okay, so do I feel on this day the pain and suffering of my people through the generations? Can I identify with Jews who lived in another land thousands of years ago and the catastrophe of their lives? Can I read that as my story? Can I put myself in that narrative? And what does it mean to put myself in that narrative? What lessons do I draw? How do I gain a sense? And the modern question really is what we said before is, do I see these catastrophes as God's doing, and do I see them as the result of my misdeeds, or my communal misdeeds? Or do I rather see these things as the product of geopolitics, which is the way that we moderns tend to read history? I mean, the Roman Empire would have destroyed Jerusalem no matter what we did. Babylonians certainly would. However, if you read the history is very different than the history the rabbis read, right? The rabbis said the reason we lost the temple is because of idolatry, sexual immorality, and bloodshed. The Bible says the reason we lost the temple was because we rebelled against the Babylonians. And remember last week, we embraced sovereignty as a higher value than communal well-being. Again, forgive me for this, but bad politics, bad leadership, foolish political decisions end up destroying the things that you value. So, I mean, it depends on what lesson you choose to draw. You see the question? That's what rabbis do, is we try to figure out what lessons do you draw from the moment you're in, and what lessons do you draw from your history. All right, today we're going to do something which is akin to this, which I think is interesting. So you remember that Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great 20th century Jewish philosopher, taught us that Judaism is a religion of time. That the great gift of Judaism to human consciousness is a notion of the sanctity of time. And that the sanctity of time is the holiness, the architecture of time is where Jews invest holiness. So the Sabbath is our great holy place. The Kippur is our holy of holies. You don't go to a place in order to, you don't have a where in order to be Jewish. You have a when. You have a when. It's time that becomes Jewish sanctity, not space. That was Heschel's great contribution, great vision of the orientation of Jewish history. However, there are places that we identify as holy. And the principal place that we identify holy is Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. All through the prayers, you hear the word Yerushalayim. Jerusalem is part of our consciousness as a culture. So what is the sanctity of Jerusalem? What does it mean? And how does the tradition understand the sanctity of Jerusalem? And what does the loss of Jerusalem and its destruction mean in the mind of the Jewish people? We have to identify this if we're going to understand this Tisha B'Av holiday, this commemoration tonight. The city of Jerusalem, we're going to find, and that's the reason I gave you this sheet, and I apologize to those watching, and I'll put it up on Monday so you can follow this. What we're going to discover is that Jerusalem plays a dual role in the mind of the Jewish people. It has always been a real place and a symbol. And it's the conflict between those two realities, real place and symbol, that makes the whole discussion of Jerusalem so very interesting. Because you always have to ask yourself, when is it being considered a real place, and when is it be considered a symbol? And in case you don't catch this, just a couple of months ago, when the United States moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the really interesting question was, real place or symbol? Because the truth is, they didn't move the embassy. If you need any embassy services, it's still down in Tel Aviv. They own a piece of land which they will develop, but if you know anything about development in Jerusalem, it could be 1,000 years. You know, by the time they get the permits and the contractors and the electrician shows up and the plumber does, you know. But again, it's Jerusalem as symbol, not as reality. And this is going to be an interesting thing watching through Jewish history. So where does Jerusalem begin? In the book of Genesis, there is a town called Shalem. It's ruled by a fellow, or there's a priest there named Malchit-Tzedek. Malchit-Tzedek, the king of righteousness. And Malchit-Tzedek, he welcomes Abraham to the town of Shalem, and Abraham recognizes that he's in a holy place. This probably, not everybody knows this, but this probably is the origins of the town. That is, before Abraham, this was a place, this was a locale that was already identified as a holy place. It has vibes. Anybody ever been to Santa Fe, New Mexico? It has vibes. People who have these sensitivities say, ooh, holy place. Me, I just said, beautiful place, right? You know, but Keith went there. She lived in a little town, Abiquiu, just north of it, and she said it has vibe. There are these holy places in the world where people have a sense that something here is different. Jerusalem is one of these places. So for thousands of years, even before Abraham, this was a holy place. We meet it in Genesis, and then we don't meet it again. The city is not mentioned again in the rest of the Torah. It occurs again in the book of Samuel, when David, King David, who has assumed the kingship from the failed kingship of Saul, needs to unite his tribes together. He has all of these disparate Jewish tribes, these Israelite tribes, and he's trying to unite them into one people, into one nation. He unites them under his leadership, either by attraction or by force, and then he needs a capital. And he wants that capital to be the royal capital, the king's capital, and not belong to any particular tribe. So he goes up and conquers the city, Shalem, which is held by a Canaanite tribe called the Jebusites. The Jebusites are holding Jerusalem. David conquers it, and he establishes his palace there, and he moves the Ark of the Covenant, which is still in a tent, up to that hill, and across the street from the king's palace is now the Ark of the Covenant in a tent. So now, if you want to show your reverence to God by offering a sacrifice at the shrine of the God of our ancestors, you got to pay your taxes across the street to the king. The king has now become the protector of the faith. You see how that works? David makes a prayer to God. I'm living in this nice palace. God is living in a tent. Let me build a temple. And the prophet Nathan tells him, God don't want a temple. God likes tents. Right? But then his son will come along, and his son will build a tent into a temple, and that's the beginning of what you call the first temple. It was built on a hillside in Jerusalem in the year about 1000 BCE. That's the first temple. That temple stands there. It gets remodeled a number of times. It gets desecrated and then re-sanctified. And finally, it's going to be the one that's destroyed in Jeremiah's time. We did that last week. In 586 BCE by the Babylonians. The community goes off to exile. They sit by the waters of Babylon and they weep. And they come back 70 years later under Cyrus, the Persian emperor, and they rebuild it. That's called the Second Temple. The rebuilt temple is the Second Temple. It's rebuilt in roughly 444 BCE, and it stands there until the Romans will destroy it in 70 CE. Now, at first it didn't look like it, you think about it, because what it looked like was pretty modest, but there was a big remodeling campaign by a half-Jewish king by the name of Herod. Herod was a lunatic. I mean, that's documented, and a megalomaniac and a murderer. He killed his wife, he killed his kids. Lovely fellow. The wonderful thing he did was build. He built Caesarea, he built Masada, and he built the temple over again. And what he did was he wanted to build a glorious grand temple as a tribute to his mentor, which is Augustus Caesar. So he needed a bigger hill. Anyone here in construction? What do you do when you need a bigger hill? You build giant retaining walls, and then you fill in the gaps, and you create a platform. And he built these giant retaining walls, filled in the gap, created the platform, and built the temple. It's on what's called the Temple Mount today. Most everybody believes that the temple was right where the Dome of the Rock is now. And that temple stood there not for too long, because as soon as Herod is finished, then the Jews begin revolting and the Romans destroy it in the year 70. And what's left of it are the retaining walls. The Kotel, what is you call the Western or Wailing Wall, the Kotel is a retaining wall to the hill. Go ahead. Ask me why we pray at a retaining wall. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Why do we pray in a retaining wall?
I have no idea. And then from that moment forward, which is Tisha B'Av in the year 70, then something really interesting happens to Jerusalem. You'll see it in a minute. It ceases to be place and completely becomes dissolved in symbolism. Until late modernity, when we return to our homeland and Jerusalem returns to place. Let's take a look inside. You have two texts here. You have two texts here. One which represents place and the other which represents symbol. One which represents now and one which represents future. But let's hold on to those for a moment and go to 1 Kings chapter 8. You see 1 Kings chapter 8? This is the dedicatory speech that Solomon prayed on the day that he dedicated the Temple of Jerusalem. So Solomon in 930 BCE is building a temple where David's palace, across the street from David's palace, okay? He's building this temple. Actually, he didn't build it. You'd find this very funny. He did what all Jewish families did. He hired a non-Jewish contractor, a guy named Hiram, who came from Tyre, from Lebanon. So he hires, he hires the contractor. And this was a divine mission because it got done pretty quickly and under budget. And when it's done, Solomon makes a prayer. Listen to the prayer. It's a kind of an interesting reflection on the whole project, right? Will God really dwell on earth? That's an interesting thing to say, the dedication of a temple. Because the theory of the temple, of course, is that God lives in this temple. This is not just a symbol of a place. This is God lives in the Holy of Holies in this temple. Even the heavens to their utmost reaches cannot contain you, how much less this house that I've built. That's a very modest thing to say, right? Yet, there's the other side of the paradox. Turn, O Lord my God, to my prayer and my supplication. May your eyes be open day and night toward this house, toward this place of which you've said, my name shall abide there. May you hear the prayers which we offer toward this place. When you hear the supplications which your people Israel offer toward this place, give heed in your heavenly dwelling. Hear us and forgive us. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon and said, I have heard the prayer and supplication which you've offered me. I consecrate this house which you have built, and I set my name there forever. My eyes and my heart shall ever be there. Now, here's what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, I will live there. What does he say? My name will live there. You see what they're playing with something here. Because the biblical author is very aware of the fact that you can't put God in a place. And yet my name will be there, and I will attend to this place, and I will hear the prayers of this place. And it's interesting, what's interesting is, notice what Solomon says. He doesn't say what you think he's going to say, which is, when we pray in this place, you listen to our prayers. Right? I don't know how many of you get these solicitations all the time from these websites and telephone calls where if you give them $72, they will put a note in the wall for you. Have you seen this? Have you seen this? You haven't seen this? Give me your phone number. I'll make sure you get They will write a note. They'll even let you watch on FaceTime. They will write a note, and then a little guy will run up to the Kotel and put your note into the Kotel, because after all, that's the local call. That's how God gets your notes, your prayers, right? I mean, I think you can just email direct, It's God@heavenandearth.com, or div, I guess, divinity, right? But that's not what he says. What he says is, may you hear the prayers which we offer toward this place. So wherever you are, if you turn in that direction, that's where God is going to hear your prayers. You don't actually have to be in the place. So it's a really interesting question of holy place. Is there such thing as a holy place? God says, okay, I will consecrate this house. I'll make it sacred. And I'll set my name there. And my eyes and heart shall ever be there. But if you pray in that direction, your prayers, you see the interesting question. The Bible's trying to figure out two things. Because on the one hand, it has an idea of a universal God, a God who's everywhere. And on the other hand, it has a sense, it has a royal, the guy who writes this works for the king. And he has to say something that this place has some sort of prenatal, some supernatural quality, some sanctification. It's closer to God in this place. And he wants both ideas at the same time, and he's struggling with it. Can you hear that in the text? Can you hear that in the text? Now, what happens next is going to be remarkable. Once you build a building, once you build a human institution, and you fill it with God, what happens next? Well, human beings, say that again. Did you say dues? Yeah, building funds, right. Right. You get an interesting thing happens. Now you have God living in your neighborhood, but we're human. And the difference between a sense of divine purity and human immorality becomes a big problem. Yeah, Bill.
Does it also mean that you are not speaking to God if you're not in that place?
No, see, that's why I find you would think that's what it would say. Only from here will our prayers go to heaven. You'd think that's what he'd say, but he doesn't say that. He says, may your eyes be open toward this house, toward the place you say my name will abide there. May you hear the prayers which you offer toward this place. So you don't have to be there. You just have to you have to be davening in that direction, you see?
But you're thinking about the place as opposed to thinking about God.
Yeah, well, the place now becomes access to God. There's an interesting thing. Anyone ever been to the wall, to the Kotel? You ever been to the Kotel? Everybody goes to Israel. They give you a little paper yarmulke. And you walk down. If you're male or if you're female, they tell you to go away. And you walk down, right? And then if you're really a tourist, you put on your white shoes and your polyester pants, and you go on a Friday night, right? And you watch all the little Shiva guys down there and all the little Frum guys and the guys in their kapatas and their streimelach and they're all done. You say, oh my God, it's such a beautiful... I go down there, and then what's really interesting is that you go to the wall and you turn around and you look up. There is a yeshiva. It's called Porat Yosef. It literally overlooks the wall. I mean, whoever bought that real estate is... I want that guy initial. Right. And you see, and what you can see is the Beis Medrash, is the study hall of the yeshiva of Parsha Yosef. And you see there on Friday night, the kids who study there, the guys who study there, are davening in the Beis Medrash of Parsha Yosef. That Bill Kabaker doesn't get to the Kotel every Friday night, I understand, because he lives in Woodland Hills. But why a person who's 100 yards away from the Kotel davens in his Beis Midrash instead of going down to the Kotel? Because you don't have to go to the Kotel, because all you do is pray toward the Kotel. And not even toward the Kotel. The Kotel is a retaining wall. Go ahead, ask me why you pray to a retaining wall. But rather, toward the holiness that's behind it. You see the interest? So you see how place, even from the very beginning, the whole idea of sacred place as a place where God lives was compromised. It was compromised. I want to get to the next text, so Arnie and then Michael, yeah.
Yeah, I like towards the place.
Yeah.
But the preposition is "the," so it's in the place.
Is that really what it says? Be? Not toward?
Well, I don't know the Hebrew, but
It's in the Chumash. It's a haftorah. You can find the haftorah. It's probably in Mishpatim. Right? We'll find it. It's one of the. We'll find it. The translator then thought it was toward, so maybe that's a diaspora translation. Michael, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He was very upset.
Yeah.
The whole idea of places being holy.
Yes.
He said the sanctuary is not holy, the seats are in there are not holy, even the temple in Israel is not holy, or was not holy. He said the only thing that's holy is Torah, is the actual Torah itself. That is holy. Everything else is man-made, and it's put on there by man,
Yeah.
and we should not look at it as holy.
Yeah, see, the question is, what does holy place mean? Can there be a holy place?
It's sanctified.
Yeah, sanctified. But I mean, it's a really interesting question. Holy, what does holy place mean? What does it mean that a place is infused with more divinity than any other place? Or an object is infused with more divinity than any other object? What does that really mean? And how do it's not just how you treat it, it's really the whole mythology of if I pray there. I told you once that I used to watch people who grasp the Sefer Torah when we carry it around. And they offer prayers while holding the Torah. Right? Now, the Torah is holy, but the Sefer Torah, the scroll of the Torah, is just the thing. And what they're touching is not even the Torah, it's the cover. And so the question is, what's holy here? Where does holiness live? What does it mean to get closer to God? That's why Heschel moved in the other direction and said only holy times, not holy space. Because holy time can accept infinity, but holy space makes something finite. And once you make it finite and put it under the control of humans, you end up with a desecration. Right? What? It becomes an idolatry. Right? It becomes an idolatry because you say it belongs to me and not to you. It belongs to my kind of people and not your kind of people. Right? And then you get into all kinds of interesting politics. But on the other hand, is this let's go the other way for a minute. Is this a natural tendency of human beings to sanctify places as we sanctify objects because things become important to us? Right? Anyone here ever moved out of a house you lived in for a very long time? And there's a pang of pain? Because that's where my kids were, that's where these moments of mine were. Now Heschel would say moments of you associate with moments, that's time. But places do. As the great Rabbi Paul McCartney once wrote, there are places I remember in my life, though some have changed, some for better, some for... But all the places... John Lennon wrote that?
That's a John Lennon.
That's sorry. Then as the Talmud says, some say Rabbi McCartney, and some say it was Rabbi Lennon. As the there are places, all these places I remember, right? That's things, Nina and I were married 39 years ago at the Ambassador Hotel, Oliver Shalom. And when they tore it down, we Nebuch. We were married. There's a beautiful high school there now. So I always want to go in there and stand on the spot with a bunch of kids. I was married here. I don't know. It still has a pang. It's the place I got married. It's it's gone. Yeah, Howard, please.
What do you think of that new law that Knesset passed that
Let's go to the next text. Let me say what I said before, and I'll say it again as obliquely as I can. When you take something that people deem as sacred, and you give it to human beings to control, bad things happen. Because politics gets involved. Use it as a weapon to divide instead of to unite. If it's used, that's tonight's lesson, by the way, if you'll come to Tisha B'Av. You can use sacred symbols as you can use sacred symbols to unite, and you can use sacred symbols to divide. All depends on how you choose to use them. Here's Isaiah. This is the haftorah for today, by the way. Today is called, in the Jewish calendar, it has a name. It's called Shabbat Chazon, because the haftorah is the first chapter of Yeshayahu, of Isaiah. Isaiah is a prophet who lived in the 8th century, 9th century, the 800s, the 700s, so that makes it 8th century BCE. And he prophesied against the temple. And today's we read it's called Chazon because it begins with the vision of Isaiah, right? Fair Zion. Zion is Jerusalem. Fair Zion is like a booth in a vineyard, like a hut in a cucumber field. So you're living in the city and you say, oh my God, this is a powerful, powerful city. He says, no, it's terribly fragile. It's terribly fragile. Bottom of the page. Like a city beleaguered. Had not the Lord of God left us some survivors, we should be like Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the opening. And that's a vision he's having. And what is he seeing? And here's the vision. Hear the word of the Lord, you chieftains of Sodom. Give ear to our God and God's instructions, you folk of Gomorrah. This is preached in front of the holy temple, while the Assyrian armies of the Assyrian Empire are marching on Jerusalem. How do you think people accepted this?
Not so well.
Yeah, if I tell you you're Sodom and Gomorrah, what am I telling you? You're doomed. You're doomed. God is not going to protect this place, right? What need have I of your sacrifices, says the Lord. He's standing in front of the temple, right? People are bringing sacrifices. The prophet stands there and says, what need have I of your sacrifices? Right? I am sated with burnt offerings of rams, of suet, of fatlings, of blood, of bulls. I have no delight in lambs and he-goats that you come before me. Who asked you? Who asked that of you? Now the answer is ostensibly easy. Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is all full of sacrifices. God asked us for that. Says, no, trample my courts no more. Like, get out of my house. Like God is saying to the Jews, get out of my house. Go, shoot, get off my lawn. No more. Bring oblations. Oblations are sacrifices. Is futile. Incense, which part of the sacrifice was incense, is offensive to me. New moons and Sabbath, those are sacrifices. Proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies with iniquity. I cannot invite. Listen to the next one. Your new moons and fixed seasons, these are sacrificial worship. Fill me with loathing. They're a burden to me. I cannot endure them. What does God say? God, through the God of the prophet, says to the people of Israel, you make me sick. More than that, your worship makes me sick. This temple makes me nauseous. Why? Because you do it all so carefully. You're so careful. Every sacrifice, every gesture, every priestly tradition is kept with such precision, while the city has become filled with immorality. You are so punctilious, so medactic, so careful in your keeping of ritual, and you are so lax, oblivious, indifferent to the suffering that lives in your city. Right? They're a burden to me. When you lift up your hands, I turn my eye. Though you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Devote yourself to justice. Aid the wrong. Uphold the rights of the orphan. Defend the cause of the widow. What's wrong? You have a sacred place, but you're not living in it like a sacred place. You've turned it into a metropolis. And in your metropolis, what have you done to it? You've turned it into a metropolis full of all kinds of urban immorality. The city, the Bible hates cities, by the way. You knew that, right? The Bible hates cities because in cities people can get away with murder. Because in cities there's urban anonymity. You know, the body was found in front of the 7-Eleven and no one knows who killed him. The idea that people can kill, murder, rape, destroy, steal, and get away with it, because in a city you can get away with it. So the prophet has this idea that if you're going to have a holy place, you'd better abide by the morality of the covenant, because just the offering of sacrifices isn't enough. I mean, in some ways, Isaiah takes holy place more seriously than his people do. Holy place doesn't just mean a temple with sacrifices. It means a city that abides by the covenant. A city that abides by the law of Torah. And if you don't, turn the page. Look at the top of the next page. This line at the top of the page is read in a different trope. It's read in a different trope. As you know, the haftorah trope you all know is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. This is the trope we read, the haftorah. It sounds like this. It's melodic and lovely. Here's Echa trope. Echa yashva badad ha'ir abatiyam. It's very sad. It talks of destruction. The next line, you stop reading the haftorah trope, which is melodic, and you move to this mournful trope. Alas. The word alas in Hebrew is echa. So the first line of this line is also the first line of the book we're going to read tonight. And echa means, how could it happen? How it's post-Holocaust, right? How did this happen? Echa. Echa, alas, she's become a harlot, the faithful city that was filled with justice, where righteousness dwelled, but now murderers. Your silver has turned to dross, your wine is cut with water, your rulers are rogues, cronies of thieves, everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. Don't call me and say I made fun of politicians. This is Isaiah. They do not judge the case of the orphan. The widow's cause never reaches them. Right? You hear what he's saying? You filled a city with immorality. Now, what would the people respond? Remember last week? The people would say, Prophet, this is just normal. Come on, politicians always lie. You know, all right, so a guy who walks into court with an expensive lawyer is going to cream the guy who walks into court with the public defender. That happens in a society. So merchants cut corners. So politics and economics and social life in the community has a tinge of immorality. Is that a reason to destroy everything? And what does the prophet respond? It is if you want to live in God's city. Because while you may be able to adjust your vision to this quality of immorality that you live with every single day, God gets real impatient with this. You want God living in your city? Now think about this for a minute. What is he saying? You want God living in your city? You understand what it means to have God living in your city? Right? He knows the truth. God knows the truth. God doesn't need the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to tell him the truth. God knows the truth. And God knows when your politicians are lying. And God knows the truth. God knows when your economics are crooked. And God knows the truth. God knows when your social life is corrupt and murderous. I mean, he takes sacred place seriously. To Isaiah, sacred place means that the place has to live by an elevated morality. And if it doesn't live by an elevated morality, you're going to get kicked out of here. You're going to get sent out of here. So when did this become important? It became important after the destruction. Because after the destruction, people embraced these texts and said, now I know what happened. But it's a really interesting, can people live to that level? I mean, so Isaiah is asking this question, sacred place? Do you understand what it means to say a sacred place? It means you've got to live and look at life through the eyes of God. You can't look at life through the eyes, well, it gets to your question, you can't look at life through the eyes of your own nationalism or your own economic class positions or your own identity politics. You've got to see how God sees the thing. That's what it means to live in sacred place. And there's a great line at the end of this prophecy, which you'll all know. Look at the last line. Zion shall be saved by justice. Zion tifadeh b'tzedek. Anyone ever belong to a fraternity called ZBT? That's the line. ZBT. Zion tifadeh b'tzedek. Right? Zion b'tzedek tifadeh. Zion will be saved by justice. The only way that you can live if you're going to live in a sacred city, you've got to live according to my ethics, says God. Otherwise, you're out of here. And so what Isaiah is doing, he's pushing real Jerusalem into mythic Jerusalem. The city gets destroyed. Here's Lamentation. Here's the beginning of the book we'll read tonight, right? Alas, lonely sits the city, once great with people. She that was great among the nations has become like a widow. The princess among states has become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheeks wet with tears, there's none to comfort her. So what is Zion? What is Jerusalem? It's a woman. He uses, the book of Lamentation imagines Jerusalem as a woman who's lost everything precious to her. A mother who's lost children, a princess who's lost her prerogatives, right? A widow who's lost her family, lonely, empty, children are taken away in exile. And what's really interesting about Lamentations is it doesn't mention the temple. The temple is absent from this. It's all about the city. It's all about the city, and the city is emptied of inhabitants. And imagine the prophet walking the empty streets of the city the day after the exile. And sort of Twilight Zone again, right? To see this empty city, this deep sense of destruction having taken away everything that was once beautiful. Everything that was once beautiful. And then the people go away to exile. So look at the bottom left. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and there we wept, as we remembered Zion. So the Babylonians take the principal population of Jerusalem back to the imperial capital. That's the way you pacify a land. You take away the populace, set them into the imperial capital, and you hope that separated from their land, forced to live as a minority in a great multicultural capital, they'll soon assimilate. And the exiles by the waters of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. There on the poplars, we hung our lyres, our guitars, our musical instruments. For our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for music. Sing one of those songs of Zion. Right, having destroyed the city, then the captors say to the captives, sing us one of your folk songs. You Jews are good singers. How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? So what's going on here? This is the birth of diaspora culture. Can we live as a diaspora people? If Jerusalem is the sacred place, can we live anyplace else? How do you sing a song to the Lord on ancient soils? This question we've still been asking for a long time. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue stick to my palate. So let me lose the power of action and speech if I forget Jerusalem. If I cease to think of you, if we do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour. Im eshkechech Yerushalayim. In Persian wedding traditions, this is recited right before the groom smashes the glass. Because they adopted the idea that the glass that he breaks at the end is this. It's the destruction of Jerusalem that is remembered even at the happiest hour. A groom has just been married to his bride, and before they enter the bridal chamber, he remembers that the world is still stained with brokenness because Jerusalem lies captive, right? Jerusalem now becomes a symbol of everything that was sacred to us taken away. Do you see how that works? Everything's sacred and taken away. So the haftorah we will read next week is the first one after Tisha B'Av. It's called Shabbos Nachamu because it begins with these words, "Comfort, comfort my people, says God." This is in the book of Isaiah, but this is a different Isaiah. There's another guy named Isaiah. This is a guy who lives several generations after Isaiah, the beginning Isaiah. This is a guy who lives during the exile. And he is sent to the people in diaspora to tell them what? Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Bring comfort to Jerusalem. Declare to her that her term of service is over. Her iniquity is expiated. This is the prophet of resurrection, the prophet of return. And what's the symbol of the resurrection and return of the people? We return to Jerusalem. Jerusalem becomes the symbol of this nation's being, its identity. So the reconstruction of Jerusalem becomes the symbol of the reconstruction of this exiled people that's going to return from home. Right? Yes, please.
So much of the songs we sing are from Tehillah.
Yeah.
But going to camps and stuff, so many songs are from Isaiah. Is it because of that reason?
It's because the guy could write. Right? The guy could write. Right? He really knew what he was doing, right? Oh yes, oh yes. If you know the Bible, you know all the Hebrew songs, right? Speak tenderly, Jerusalem, declare that her servant, she has received at the hand of the Lord double for her sins. Ascend the lofty mountain, O herald of joy to Zion. Raise your voice with power, O herald of joy to Jerusalem. Raise it, have no fear. Announce to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Put on your robes. O majesty, Jerusalem, for the stranger, the unclean, shall never enter you again. Arise, shake off your dust, sit on your throne. We're going to be resurrected. The resurrection of the city becomes the resurrection of the people. Only one problem. Only one problem. When you promise a group of people, we're going home, what do they have in mind? The home that their parents and grandparents told them about. The glorious, beautiful city that was once glorious. In fact, as grandparents and parents told their kids, it got more and more and more glorious. Right? Anyone ever returned to their hometown, their home, and you hadn't been, you either never had been there or you hadn't been there in a long, long, long time? And what, yeah? What's different about it? It's not glorious because the town and the let me tell you about Jerusalem, right? You'll see that in a minute, right? Right? Now you can Google it, I guess. It's even worse, right? Right. So what happens? They come back to Jerusalem, and it's a ruin. It's an absolute ruin, and the people lose heart, and they try to rebuild the temple. And, you know, they have no resources, right? The Persians sent them back, but they didn't send building supplies. So and Jews don't know how to use power tools, you know. So this Nebuch, you have a bunch of Jewish men, lawyers, accountants, trying to build something. I mean, it's on Sukkot, it's the most funny thing in the world, you know. I mean, that's why they had this tradition that every sukkah has to be shaky, because it's built by a Jewish accountant, you know. stockbrokers, sociology professors, screenwriters. Go ahead. It's true. It's exactly true. They think Black & Decker is a law firm in Beverly Hills. They think Makita is a real Japanese dog. So you imagine these Jews are trying to build, and they're losing heart, and they say, screw it, let's go back to Babylon. By the waters of Babylon, we had nice houses. And so a prophet named Zechariah comes by, and he says to the people, you're looking at the city with the wrong eyes. Don't look at this as real estate. Look at this as symbol, as power, right? Thus says the Lord of hosts, I love Zion with passion. What a beautiful thing to say. I am fiercely in love with her. Thus says the Lord, I have returned to Zion. I will dwell in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be called City of Faithfulness. And the mount of the Lord of hosts, the holy mount, thus says the Lord of hosts, I will rescue my people from the lands of the east and the lands of the west, and I'll bring them home to dwell in Jerusalem. One of the great messianic dreams is kibbutz galiot, the gathering of the exiles, right? They shall be my people, and I will be their God in truth and in unity. Don't look at this city with the eyes of real estate. Look at this city as a symbol of the resurrection of this people. Who cares what the building looks like? So what you have here is this mixing of the two. Because the city is always going to be a moral challenge, because anything real in this world, lived in and governed by people, is a moral challenge, but at the same time it is a symbol of what's precious to us. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. The temple is rebuilt, the city is rebuilt, it becomes a great metropolis, and then in the year 70, the Romans destroy it. And the rabbis go into exile. Many of them stay in the land for several generations, until about the year 200, and then there's a massive exodus. Under Hadrian's rule, there's a massive exodus, and Jerusalem now becomes another symbol. And it becomes a symbol, because if you don't have the physical Jerusalem, you turn it into a symbol. So what do the rabbis say? Look at the middle here. There are 10 portions of beauty in the world, 9 in Jerusalem and 1 in the rest of the world. Right? There are 10 portions of suffering in the world, 9 in Jerusalem, 1 in the rest of the world. The third page. There are 10 portions of wisdom in the world. 9 in Jerusalem, 1 in the rest. There are 10 portions of godlessness in the world. Do you hear the argument here? There are 10 portions of Torah. And you feel, in the source at the top talks about, well, what do we do if we don't have a city? One time Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was leaving Jerusalem, and he saw Rabbi Yeshua going after his student, Rabbi Yeshua, and he saw the temple destroyed. And Rabbi Yeshua said, woe that this is destroyed, the place where Israel's sins were atoned. And he said, my son, do not be distraught. We have atonement similar to this. And what is it? Gemilut chesed, acts of atonement, acts of kindness. So Yeshua, the young student, says, Rebbe, with no temple, we will never be one with God. And the teacher says, nonsense, we'll have Gemilut chesed, we'll have acts of kindness. In other words, the temple has become an obstacle to our faith, not an instrument. We have better means of coming close to God. Because once the temple became a real institution, it was governed by the politics of the time, and it's bound to become immoral. It's bound to become political and an instrument. Gemilut chesed, acts of kindness, is a much purer way. You don't need a temple to approach God. And they go on like this. They trade a bunch of verses. Right? And they talked about all the things that bring us close to God. And now, as the exiles leave Jerusalem and they move to Babylon, the first great exile of the Jewish people, they moved eastward to Babylon and they moved westward across the Mediterranean. What did they carry with them? Songs of Jerusalem. All the trees of Jerusalem were made of cinnamon. And when they kindled their wood, their perfume would spread throughout the land of Israel. And when the temple was destroyed, they were hidden away and only a trifle remained. What does that mean? All the trees of Jerusalem were cinnamon. What does that mean? It was always Shabbos. Wherever you walked, it was Shabbos. Right? Anyone have relatives from another place? Older relatives from another place? Oh, back in Brooklyn. All the trees of Brooklyn were cinnamon, right? Back in Chicago, back in Romania, back in Tehran. This is that beautiful nostalgia, right? And now they carry this. So what has Jerusalem become for most of Jewish history? The symbol of our peoplehood, the symbol of our dreams, the symbol of our redemption. That's the Zechariah text of Zechariah, the symbol of our redemption. Only in the late 19th century. That's why they never went. You ever ask yourself the question? Jews could have gone to Jerusalem. It was open. You could get there. Everybody went to visit. No one stayed. How come they didn't go? They left Spain. Why did they all move to Jerusalem? Pogroms in Europe. Why did they all move to Jerusalem? Why? Because it stopped being a place and it became a complete symbol. Became a complete symbol. Right? I mean, I told the first time I went to Israel, I called my bubby to say goodbye. She says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem." She says, "You can go?" Really? You can go? She didn't believe it. I mean, because it was a place. It wasn't a place anymore. It ceased to be a territory and became a symbol. It became a dream. In Heschel's words, it ceased to be a place and it became a time. Messiah time. It became Messiah time. When you pray, God who redeems Jerusalem, Birkat HaMazon, Uvenei Yerushalayim, Yirakodesh b'mira b'yameinu, or in the morning prayers, Bonei Yerushalayim, God who builds Jerusalem, what are you saying? Not the physical Jerusalem. That time when we will all be gathered together in the holy city. That time that Zechariah talks about, when we will be gathered together and redeemed from the east and the west. That's what they're talking about. Only in the late 19th century, with the rise of political Zionism, did we start to go back. But that's a problem. Because if you have a dream, keep it a dream. But if you have a dream and you go back and you look at the actual thing, right? I mean, how many of you remember your college boyfriend or girlfriend? Keep them in your dreams. Right? Because in my dreams, she's still 19 years old, and in reality, she's already got Social Security and Medicare, Achad Ha'am, the great Zionist thinker, goes to Jerusalem. Achad Ha'am, the great Zionist thinker, visits Jerusalem in 1891. And this is what he writes. It's so sad. I came to Jerusalem for Passover Eve to pour out my thoughts and my anger before the sticks and stones, the ancient remnants of our most precious place. Obviously, my first stop was the wall. There I found crowds of our brothers, dwellers of Jerusalem, standing. Who lived in Jerusalem in 1891? The old Yeshuv. Yeah, the old Yeshuv, what they called the old Yeshuv, which was made up of Sfardim, who basically never left. They came from Spain and they did settle in Jerusalem, and they were mystics mostly, Kabbalists, and old Ashkenazim who had come to Jerusalem to die. There was a tourist trade, and you're going to find this bizarre, of old Ashkenazim, pious Ashkenazim, who came to Yerushalayim simply to die. So he comes and he sees what they call, this is the old Yeshuv, the old settlement of Jerusalem. There I found crowds of our brothers, dwellers of Jerusalem, standing and praying in loud voices. Their thin faces, their strange motions, their odd dress seemed to fit the terrible state of the wall. The wall in 1891 was an alley that had become a garbage dump to the families that lived in that part of the city. Don't think of it as that big plaza you see now. It's an alley. It was barely one person's length wide, and it was filled with trash, and there was no mechitza, by the way. We have pictures of it. No mechitza.
This is wide as this chapel.
Yeah. As I stood and contemplated them and the wall. So he's standing there watching these old broken Jews and this old broken wall. And here is the great Zionist thinker, Achad Ha'am. One thought filled my mind. These stones are witnesses to the destruction of our land. These people to the destruction of our people. In a certain sense, he gets the symbolic value, right? The broken city is a symbol of our broken people. Which destruction is greater? For which should we lament more bitterly? If the land is destroyed, but people remains full of life and strength, a Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah can arise. They're the ones who rebuilt the temple, and the nation will follow them, return and rebuild. But if the people is destroyed, who can restore it, and from whence will it help arise? Just the brokenness, right? So what happens? There is a resurrection. A young generation, in 1895, a young generation starts coming. The first Aliyah, then the second Aliyah, at the beginning of the century. Young Jews start coming, and they rebuild this land. They recover this land. And they recover this city. And they begin to rebuild the city. And then in 1967, the most remarkable thing happens. We have the Six-Day War. Now you remember what happened. So the Arab armies are gathered at this, they close the Straits of Tiran. Abba Eban goes to the UN, makes that beautiful speech. Nobody listens to him. They remove the peacekeepers from the Egyptian border. The Egyptian armies are gathered. The Syrian armies are gathered. The Iraqi armies are gathered. And everybody thinks we're all going to die. They started digging mass graves outside of Tel Aviv in 1967 because they were convinced that this was going to be, if not the end, certainly a horrible thing. And the government, Levi Eshkol's government, cables Hussein in Jerusalem, don't enter the war. We don't need these hostilities. They had good relations with Hussein. He didn't listen. So the Jordanians who owned the eastern sector of Jerusalem begin shelling the western section of Jerusalem. So the Israelis send a gedud, they send a crew of commandos, right, to the eastern section of Jerusalem to stop the shelling. And once they stop the shelling, they discover something interesting. There's nothing between them and the old city. So they decide sort of on their own. If you read Yossi Klein Halevi's book, they decided on their own to keep going. They keep going, and they radio in. We're in. We got into the city. They didn't have orders to go into the city, but they decided to go into the city. So they went into the city. And they fight their way pretty easily to the wall. And they send back this idea, Harabayit Biyadenu. Harabayit Biyadenu, the holy place, the mountain of the house, the Temple Mount. We have it. What? We're coming to that. I promise you we're coming to that. We're coming to that. Here's Golda Meir, American Jewish lady who makes Aliyah early, she's the foreign minister. For 19 years, from 1948 to 1967, we were banned by the Arabs from going to the old city and praying at the wall. She's not a religious lady. But the wall is the wall, right? But on the third day of the Six-Day War, Wednesday, 7 June, all Israel was electrified by the news that our soldiers had liberated the old city, and it was open to us again. I had to fly to the United States 3 days later, but I couldn't bring myself to leave Israel without going to the wall again. So that Friday morning, although civilians were not allowed to enter the old city because the shooting was still going on there, I received permission to go to the wall despite the fact that I wasn't in the government, just an ordinary citizen. I guess she wasn't the foreign minister then. Like any other. I went to the wall together with some soldiers. There in front of it stood a plain wooden table with some submachine guns on it. Uniformed paratroopers wrapped in prayer shawls clung so tightly to the wall that it seemed impossible to separate them from it. What?
Ready to go. Like 2 minutes.
Seriously? Oh boy. Oh, you know what happened? I'll have to go do this blessing. We'll come back and finish this. Don't move. Right? I mean, seriously, that's where we're going to... Can you stay a few minutes? Yeah. I got to go bless somebody for a bar mitzvah. Right? They wrapped themselves in prayer shawls and wept, and I took a sheet of paper and wrote the word shalom on it and pushed it into a cranny of the wall as I'd seen Jews do so long ago. As I stood there, one of the soldiers, I doubt he knew who I was, suddenly put his arm around me, laid his head on my shoulder, and we cried together. I suppose he needed the release and comfort of an old woman's warmth. And for me, it was one of the most moving moments of my life. It's symbol and it's reality. Now that conflict between symbol and reality is going to play out in the next generation as well. So here's the issue. If I declare a place as a holy place, it's fine as long as nobody lives there. Because once you put people into a holy place, what are they going to do? Screw it up. No, screw it up is too simple. They're going to make it a place. They're going to bring all of their issues. They're going to bring their nationalism and their chauvinism and their prejudices and they're going to bring their dreams and their hopes and their aspirations and their sense of history. As long as the place is empty, as long as a place is just a dream by the waters of Babylon, there we sat and there we wept as we remembered Zion. As long as it's a dream, it's pristine, it's beautiful, it's sacred, it's powerful. I can imagine God living there. But once I bring people bring all of their shtick. Now some of that's profoundly beautiful. They bring children. They bring moments of healing and helping and giving chesed. That was Rabbi Yochanan's idea. They bring chesed. They bring acts of kindness to each other. But they also bring all their other stuff. So how do you live in a sacred place? How do you have a place that's a sacred place? And how do you have it a real place? I mean, the dream of Jerusalem is so much safer as long as it remains a dream. But the moment you put real people in the place, you end up with real problems, with real issues, with real conflicts. You see that going through the history? That's always been the problem. That's why Solomon asked the question at the very beginning. How can God live on earth? Because, the old Yiddish expression is, if God lived on earth, people would break his windows. You know that expression? No, it's an old Yiddish expression. If God lived on earth, their dogs would pee on his lawn. If God lived on earth, think about this. This is such a beautiful idea. As long as God lives in heaven, everything's perfect. We can look up and see perfection. But as long as you say, this is the Holy Land, what's holy about it? Right? There's all these news stories now about these kids who are on these birthright trips. Could someone help? Help? Yeah, thanks, Steve. There's all these kids on they're leaving the birthright trips. You know what I'm talking about? Because they want to go on these, either breaking the silence or if not now, kind of crusades. The kids who believe that the birthright trips haven't shown them the real story of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And Mama, come sit in front. You got a seat over here. Come on, what are you going in the back for? Come on. It's all right. Pearl, come on. You sit. You're happy. It's okay. You have a seat of honor in this place. You bother me. For 50 years, bother me. Since I'm 8 years old, you've been... She played mahjong with my mother, You know that mahjong is a Chinese word for schmooze? I don't think that... Mahjong. I really don't think this game really exists. I think it's all a bunch of Chinese gobbledygook, just so Jewish ladies can get together, eat C's candy bridge mix, and gossip about their grandchildren. I really think it's Chinese for schmooze, right? These little tiles, and each one says, "Let me tell you about my kid." Then there's another one says, "Oi, my kid." Another one says, "Oi, my husband." Anyway, that's another story. Here's the question is, when Solomon asks the question, how can God live in the world? It's a question we're still debating. These kids go on these birthright trips and they leave in the middle as a political act because they want to say that Israel you haven't taught the story of the real Israel. But then that's the problem, you see, because if you approach Israel with the eyes of a holy place, you're going to be disappointed. And at the other hand, if you don't have that vision, you lose the aspiration. So in a certain sense, there's a basic tension, a dialectic, a dialogue here between the aspiration, the dream, the ideal of what Israel and what Jerusalem ought to be, holy place, and the reality. Right? When I lived in Jerusalem, for a couple of years as a student, and I go all the side. I didn't go this summer, but I usually go in the summer. I went in March. And like one of the things that I think is so amazing is that Jerusalem has a sanitation department. It's worthy of a poem, right? I'd rather be a garbage man in Jerusalem than a rabbi in Reseda. No, but I mean, just, because you have trash. It's got to be fixed. I mean, you got to, I wanted one of the vests. I thought it was the greatest thing on building redemption, Here's a great example of that. Turn to the last page. These are 3 poems. This is contemporary now. Okay? Shortly before the 1967 war that Golda referenced, shortly before that war, a young Israeli singer by the name of Nomi Shemer won a contest, an Israeli song contest, with a beautiful song called Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. It was written before the war. It was sung and the contest was won before the war. But when the war happened and Jerusalem was, as it were, liberated, the song became a sort of national anthem. Avir Harim Kilon Kayai, right? And you can read her beautiful lyrics, right? Yerushalayim shel zahav shel nechoshet v'shalor alo l'chol china yichani kinor. Jerusalem of gold, of copper, and light. You ever been to Jerusalem at sunrise or sunset? That's the best time to go. And you stand on the tayelet, or you stand on your hotel roof, and you watch the colors all over the stones, and it's gold and copper and light. For your songs, I am a fiddler. Halo l'chol shirayach ani kinor. I am the fiddle. I am the violin for your songs. I am just a vessel of your songs, right? By day and by night, the fragrance of scented pine trees. Remember the cinnamon trees of the Talmud? The wine-clear mountain air. It does have beautiful air, by the way. From winds that greet the nearest evening, the sound of bells everywhere. In trees and stones, asleep, a slumber, a captive of its dreams. The temple sits inside our city, alone and unredeemed. This is before the war. Okay? Still today I sing your beauty, place crowns upon your walls. I am your younger than your youngest child, a poet meek and small. But your name, a kiss of angels, burns fiery and bold. I'll not forget Yerushalayim, our city built of gold. To ancient sisters, to the city. Now, this two lines they added after the war. To ancient cisterns, to the city, we have come back again. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful song, right? Okay, that's Jerusalem the ideal, right? There was another song. There was another song, come in. There was another song written by a songwriter who's very well known in Israel, but not known at all in the diaspora. His name is Meir Ariel. Meir Ariel, how do you put him? In many ways, he is the Phil Oakes of Israel, if you know who Phil Oakes is. He wrote songs full of irony, full of protest. He wrote nice other songs too, but he wrote in this one. He was part of one of the Gedud. He was part of the crew that liberated Jerusalem, and he lost a bunch of friends. A bunch of guys were killed fighting for the city. They were killed, and like any soldier finishing a war, he sits down and asks himself, "Was it worth it? Was it worth one 25-year-old's life? Is it worth one 26-year-old husband or brother, one 27-year-old father or nephew? Is it really worth it?" And he's listening to the whole country sing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav V'Shel Nechoshet V'Shalor, all of Naomi Shemer's songs, and he gets hurt. It hurts him inside because he remembers the faces and the voices of his buddies, of the guys who had to fight and die for what? So you could have your dream. So he writes another song called Yerushalayim Shel Barzel, Jerusalem of iron or steel, right? In your darkness, Jerusalem, we found a loving heart. He was one of the guys that liberated the city. When we came to widen your borders and to overwhelm the enemy, we became satiated of all its mortars. Then suddenly dawn broke. It just arose, not even white, and it was already red. Yerushalayim Shel Barzel, the Jerusalem of iron, of lead, and of darkness. Haven't we set your wall free? The strafed battalion broke forward, all of him in blood and smoke, and a mother came, and another mother, in the congregation of bereavement, bitter biting his lips, not without toil. The battalion continued fighting, till at the end the flag flapped above the house of bitterness. Jerusalem of iron, of lead, of darkness, haven't we set your wall free? The king's army dispersed, the sniper, his tower is silent. Now it is possible to go to the Dead Sea by the way of Jericho. Now it is possible to the Temple Mountain and to the Western Wall. Here you are in twilight, almost all of you gold. Jerusalem of gold, but also of lead, and also of dream. Forever be peace within your walls. It's a beautiful song, but it's a painful. You hear the pain in him? Before you celebrate, he says, before you go all poetic and crazy on me, think of my buddies. Think of the mothers who had to come and bury sons. And ask yourself, really? That's really what you want? I mean, but that's the reality. And you'd say, well, in order to have the dream, you have to have the reality. And the reality becomes informed by the dream. Even he, at the end, Jerusalem of gold, but also of lead. Lead meaning bullets, of bullets. So you walk through the streets of Jerusalem, and that's what he sees. He sees the pockmarked walls, and he thinks of the fellows that he lost.
And that was Givat HaTach Moshe.
Yeah, right.
Lost the most.
Yeah, all these guys. But even in the operation in the city, the snipers, right? And finally, one more poem. One more poem, because I think you needed something to balance, right? So this is the great Yehuda Amichai. Well, who is Yehuda Amichai? He came to Israel in 1933 from Germany. And he was a poet, the poet laureate of Israel. He writes in easy Hebrew, by the way. You can read it even if your Hebrew is not terribly strong. And because his imagery and metaphors are relatively easy to penetrate. He lived in Yamin Moshe, which is the neighborhood, the old Jewish neighborhood that overlooks the old city. You know, and after 67, it became liberated and he could see, right? But he also was a soldier, and he also had sons who were soldiers. So here's his idea. Jerusalem, port city on the shores of eternity. The Holy Mount is a huge ship, a luxurious pleasure liner. From the portholes of your western wall, happy saints look out. Travelers. Hasidim on the dock wave goodbye, shout hurrah till we meet again. She's always arriving and always sailing. And the gates and the docks and the policemen and the flags and the high masts of churches and mosques and the smokestacks of synagogues and the boats of praise of mountains, of waves of mountain. The sounds of the ram's horn is heard. Still another sailed. Day of Atonement sailors in white uniforms, climbing among ladders and ropes of seasoned prayers. So what is Jerusalem for Amichai? What is it? It's what? It's not a city. Look again. What is it? What is it again? It's a great ship. It's a great ship. Now what is a ship doing? It's moving. It's moving. The idea of dynamism, of movement, you see? It's always moving. And where is it moving? It's moving toward eternity. It's always moving toward eternity. So Amichai's solution to this issue of how do you live in both the dream and the reality? You have to live in the reality because we live in a time and a place. But you have to live in the dream and in the symbol because that's what moves you, that's what pulls you forward through life. And the way that you do that is you imagine that this is something dynamic. This is a city that's moving. It's moving toward the dream. It's moving toward the dream. Meir Ariel lives in the dream right now because he feels the bitterness of death. Nomi Shemer feels the attraction of the symbol of the dream. And Yehuda Amichai says you have to live in both. You have to sail the ship between here and there, between now and eternity, between what's real and what's aspirational. You can't let go of either one, or you've lost it. If a ship stops sailing, what happens to it? It sinks. It's only by moving forward that the ship continues to exist. This is always what Jerusalem has been. And all of the news, I'm going to suggest to you, when you hear all this controversy and conflict, all the news about Israel, getting a call. Tessa. Hello? All right, so I'm not going to answer. It's Shabbos. Right? It's the controversies of Israel today. The controversies of Israel today, I want to suggest to you, is the contrast between the reality and the dream. And the question that Amichai's poem asks us is, are we getting closer to the dream or farther away? In which direction are we moving? Right? But all the controversy, all of the pain is this question of why haven't we gotten closer to the dream? Right? And tonight, when we do Tisha B'Av, you're going to read in the text even... You're going to read in the text of the contrast between the reality and the dream. To live in both reality and dream is the classic Jewish position in the world. Jews have always been people living between here and there, between what we are and what we aspire to be. I wish everybody a really good Shabbos and a great summertime. We'll see each other in September.